part two, I guess. Going back to the terrible twos. So, around the time that we're two, we're starting to be expected to do things for ourselves. We may be expected to learn to tie our own shoes. We may be expected to learn to go to the bathroom and a toilet, and all of the other, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. Uh, a lot of 2-year-olds still want to be carried around. They don't want to walk themselves, and then sometimes they do. But it's a time of rapid change from what was perceived as a really long norm of being waited on hand and foot. Um, so, what does this have to do with human nature? Well, depending on how the terrible twos are dealt with, sometimes they never end. I've known individuals that are 50 plus years old and still behave like they're in their terrible twos. Um, I've dealt with a lot of customers in various places that believe that screaming and having a temper tantrum will immediately get them their way. Uh, if you've ever watched any of the frickin' nanny shows that were on TV for a while that were super popular, well, I don't know if they were actually popular, but if you've ever watched them, you can basically see teenage kids or kids between the ages of, 6 to 17 that are just acting like 2-year-olds. Um, and it's because typically it still works in some situations, in some households, in some scenarios, and some scenarios warrant a tantrum. I'm not gonna lie. I try to go with being polite and kind to begin with, and depending on the scenario, it can become one that requires anger. But these types of people just go straight to temper tantrum every time. Whether it's crying or just angry, jumping around, making a big fuss over whatever little thing that it may be, and most of the time it's something little and stupid, like, they don't think they should have to wait like everybody else, and that kind of brings us back to that whole 2-year-old thing. And again, I'm not saying that any of this is true. I'm not trying to lay down answers. I'm just trying to generate questions. If you think about it, is this possibly true? I'm not saying anything is definitive. I'm just throwing out possibilities. It's not my place to try to convince anybody of anything, really. It's just a different perspective, and one that you may want to consider and you may not. I find value in looking at multiple different perspectives. I think that gives a better picture of things. So we go back to the terrible twos and how that's handled, and what we learn at that time on how to cope with the world around us. And these are called the formative years for a reason. And it's a big adjustment, and I think people are missing how big of an adjustment that this might be, because we're already at least generally 16 years in, maybe 14 depending on the situation, but oftentimes it's even longer than that, and so our perception of the difficulties that our children are having with dealing with, from being weighted on hand and foot to actually having to take care of themselves, I think it's worth examining, and I think it could make it easier to be patient with children, and just, but some of us resist from that point on, are just in a constant resistive state to change. Some of that's reinforced by the adults around us who also are resistant to change. It does seems to be a human quality to resist change. And not every childhood is the same. Not every child is weighted on hand and foot. And again, it can breed different scenarios and circumstances. But I think generally most infants are taken care of. At least the crying is done, the least amount of care is usually done to make a baby stop crying. And usually if a parent can't deal, I assume they just leave. Abandonment happens, it's there. But the point of it, this is not child care, and the variations on what a good childhood should be. It's based on our perception at that age and how our perceptions change, and if they change between then and when as we grow older. And I think that need is there for a long time because we go back to that in our minds thinking that's perfect, that's what I want. And I think as adults, I think there's a lot of adults that and the funny thing about it, I'll get back to that other thought, but the funny thing about it is that people want to be weighted on hand and foot like that, but they don't realize how dependent that makes them, and they think that that's like freedom, but it makes them helpless and completely dependent on the person that they want to wait hand and foot on them. And this is, essentially where slavery comes from, is wanting other people to do things for us. That's it. We don't want to do it, and it starts there. We come into the world, and our first experience is dealing with somebody who is taking care of us 100%, typically. Again, there's exceptions to this. There's always exceptions. But this is the general idea that most people have in their perception of children. They're taken care of. So we'll just kind of push the untaken care of children to the side for a minute. But from that's our first experience, is being cared for. I mean, even in the womb, if we can, if there's mental recording, if there's brain recording going on at that point, there's awareness, we are being taken care of. We're being fed through tube. And the rest of our lives is basically dealing with the fact that that is no longer a reality. And I just think this has a profound effect on our psyche, and I think it explains a lot about why we are the way we are, because we're just constantly trying to go back to that. And there's, it's not everybody, but there is an overwhelming theme of, why should I do that when somebody else can do it? And then as they get older, the world starts to come into focus more. The outside world starts to loom over us, and we believe that the world revolves around us. It's a common psychological fact that younger children have a very narrow understanding of the world, and we do believe it revolves around us. But we were educated by our parents that it does revolve around us, until they start to tell us that, no, you have to deal with this going on. And what we fail to come to understand as we grow older, it seems like, is that you're not going to get that again. Some people get it, I guess. Some people have their parents that baby them throughout their whole lives. We joke about the millennials, and that's pretty much what's going on, that they're just being babied through their whole lives. Maybe it's true, it's not. I mean, I'm not going to say flat out that that's true, but in some cases, and it's been true in the past, but, it happens. There are examples where people are babied throughout their lives. But the resentment that must occur from that, I guess if that's what fulfills your life, is just living it for your children, then I guess that's fine. I'm not going to say there's something wrong with that. But it does cause problems for other people. I think when we have this idea that we are the exception, because as children we see everybody moving around, um, and doing stuff, and then we're just not doing stuff. And so we get gravitated to this idea that we don't have to do anything, and then we spend the rest of our lives fighting with people. I mean, that's what most children fight with their parents about, is they don't want to do that, and they expect their parents to continue doing it because that's the way that it's always been, and their lifespan is so short that it seems like forever to them that that's been going on, and it's hard to make them understand. It's hard to make a child understand that things change when they've not really experienced that much change in their lives. Um, this can be why children who have traumatic experiences either break or are much more adaptable. It kind of goes either way. Sometimes they become stronger for the trauma that they've experienced, wiser often, if they can survive the trauma and the scarring. But so we spend the rest of our lives trying to get the rest of the world to return us to that golden age. And God, I don't know how many freaking people wish they were kids again. And it's just hysterical to me. Like, they glorify it, and sorry if that's how any of you watching this feel, but you're glorifying a moment when you were helpless. And I've always been the type of person that I've always wanted to grow up, and I don't regret growing up. I enjoyed the freedom that I've gained by being able to make my own decisions and choose my own clothes and do all the things that you can do as an adult that you couldn't dream of as a child. Yes, it's more complicated. Yes, there's a lot more responsibility, but we have a moderate control over that. And if you make good decisions, then those responsibilities are much less of a burden. Yeah, I like to be able to just get in my car and go wherever the hell I want to. I've earned my money. I can therefore use it to travel to places that I want to see, and I've seen some pretty amazing places. So the glorifying of being a child is the glorifying of being helpless. And it just goes to show that slave mentality that a lot of us have, that we want to go back to when everything was taken care of for us and we didn't have to think or do anything. And but it's just a weird scenario. Yes, you have no responsibility, but you have no freedom either. You're completely dependent on those around you, and if something were to happen to them, then you have nothing, and your life is essentially going to end if you can't adapt. And so we expect other people to just serve us, and this is just a broad expectation of human beings around us, is that we just expect them to serve us because we're special somehow. And we're just fucking not. We're just not that special individually. This is part of the point. I'm nobody. I am nothing special. I can't just expect the world to bow before me. It's just not going to happen. It's just ridiculous that it happens. But, we idolize our political figures. We think that they're something special. We think that they're not human. And it's I don't know, it's ridiculousness. But I digress yet again. We fail to realize, because we're so focused on trying to get the world to be our servants and essentially our slaves, and we avoid the word slavery because of America's history, but it's prevalent and in our face. We expect, in the past, women were expected to be slaves. Now men are expected to be slaves, and the tides turn, and it's just gotten out of control. And what we've failed to learn is that the easiest way to get something done for us is to do something for other people, is to work together. And we're all too busy trying to step each other down that we just miss the simple fact that if we work together, things are easier. And in trying to get everybody else to do these things for us, we're isolating ourselves from everybody else. and it all goes back to that initial life experience, and so many people trying to get back to it, without, and it just goes to show the lack of appreciation for what people have as adults. You know, so what? You have to shoulder a little bit of responsibility to get the things that you want. I I just don't know what to say in the face of people that refuse to do that. And for those that are completely going in a different direction here. It just seems to play a major role, and what should we expect of others? What should we expect of ourselves? Why do we think that we are the exception to every rule? Sometimes we're an exception to a rule, and sometimes we're not, but a lot of that depends on our behavior. And I don't know, it just seems like everybody thinks that, it's still okay to throw temper tantrums, when they're full grown adults. And I see so many adults that just have never grown up, and everybody's just fighting to stay a child, and to just have people make all their decisions for them, or throw a temper tantrum and to try to get their way. And even as a child, I don't know, they say as a child, oh, children have no cares, but it's just not true. To say that a child has no care is just not true. It's just the trauma is different. We laugh at it because we think it's silly, but when a child doesn't get the toy that they were hoping for, or their friend moves away, I mean, these seem small to us as adults, but these traumas for them are just as bad as watching somebody get hit by a car. It's just there's a lapse in understanding of what it meant to be a child, and I think a lot of people, they remember the good parts, but they don't remember the bad parts. Well, some do, but those who wish to be a child again, obviously, had probably more good than bad, but I just think the memory of it is skewed and idealized, and we struggle too much to stay children, and just not be responsible. And the funny thing is the more we shirk responsibility, the less freedom we have. And that's the tricky part. I think that's the part that gets skipped over, that people don't understand.